This video deals with the Blu-ray player in the PlayStation 3 machines, specifically how to test the laser in the Blu-ray player, and if we need to replace it, a fairly easy, straightforward way of replacing the laser. Also, we will talk about replacing the entire Blu-ray player and/or the control card of the Blu-ray player, and the whole problem of remarrying the Blu-ray player to the machine. This is a Sony PlayStation 3. This machine first came to the market in late 2006. They came in 3 versions. This is the first version, which was known as the Fat. It's called the Fat because it was physically the largest of the machines. The later versions were the Slim, which came out in September 2009, and the Super Slim, which came out in October 2012. There were multiple model numbers in each of these versions, depending on the size of the disk drives, how many USB ports there were, or whether there was a card reader or not. This model is the CECHL. It was manufactured in August 2008. These models came with an 80 gigabyte disk drive, 2 USB ports, and no card reader. This machine was literally a dumpster find. This machine was discarded by someone else, so it didn't cost me anything, but I have no history on the machine. Now, when I took it home and plugged it in, luckily it did work, sort of, but it did have 3 problems. First, it would not retain the time and date. Second, the fan would run abnormally fast and loud, indicating some kind of heat problem. And thirdly, the Blu-ray player would not read discs. Now, I showed in another video how to fix the time and date problem and the heat problem. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Blu-ray player. Now, this is the PS3 with the top removed, and there are several good videos on YouTube which show how to do this. Now, this is the same PS3 with the top removed and the power supply also removed, thus exposing our troublesome Blu-ray player. The Blu-ray player is held in with 2 cables, one in the front, one in the back. The front cable is simply pulled out of its socket. Now, the rear cable is a flat cable, and it's held on with this very delicate connector. This black piece here is held on with a hinge. You get your fingernail under it like this and very gently lift it back. And now you can take the whole Blu-ray player and just sort of slide this cable out like so. And now we have the Blu-ray player completely separated. Now I'm going to turn it over. You can see this flat cable running into the Blu-ray player. Now, these come in 2 varieties. There's a 24-pin version and there's a 60-pin version. This is the 24-pin version. Now, the way it comes is there'll be this big piece of tape covering this part of the cable. You have to gently peel this back, taking care not to damage this connector. This is another flip-type connector. And again, you get your fingernail underneath this and very carefully flip it back, and now you can slide this cable out. Now, on the side, there's the other end of this cable, which can also be simply pulled out. The Blu-ray player has a metal cover on the top and a metal cover on the bottom. These metal covers are held in by several screws. On the front, we have 3 small black screws, 1, 2, and 3. On the back, there are 2 silver screws, 1 and 2. The top and bottom metal covers are held in place by those screws. We will go ahead and remove those screws now. We're going to remove the top cover first.
Start by elevating the back of the top cover and then slide it forward until it clears these tabs.
Exposing this very interesting mechanism. Now this is a self-loading optical disc drive player. In other words, you slide it in part way and it senses it and then it pulls it in the rest of the way and loads it. Right on the top here you'll see this little white disc that can actually just be pulled off. It's sitting here freely. This contains a magnet. When you put your disk drive in and the tray comes up and meets this thing, it then traps the disk between two sets of magnets. That holds the disk steady so it doesn't, flop around. Just make sure you don't lose that thing. I'm going to keep the bottom cover on for now. Now, the first question that somebody might have if they're having a problem is the laser inside of this thing actually working? Is it putting out light or has it failed? And I have a very simple way to test that. So we're going to go ahead and put the Blu-ray player back into the PS3. We'll go ahead and put our 24-pin flat cable back in. There are little grooves here. You have to slide it into these little grooves. And then that black line has to line up. And now you can close this little lid with a little snap. Now, on the PS3 side, same thing. Gently lift that little hinge. Slide this cable in through those slots, those little grooves, and then go ahead, line up that black line so it's fully seated, and go ahead and close that lid again. And we have to reconnect the front cable to the Blu-ray player. Okay, connect the cable at both ends. Now we have to put the power supply back on. The power supply has to come off first and go in last because it partially covers up this cable right here. In the power supply, these prongs here have to match up with that socket right there. Okay, and then just sort of push it down into that socket. Okay, and connect the front cable to the power supply and connect the back socket to the power supply. Now it's in a state where it can now run. You don't need to put all the screws back in, just for testing purposes. I've gone ahead and reconnected a power cord. I'm going to flip the switch in the back. Now you can work these controls here without the front panel being on it. These are simply capacitive switches, these two little metal tabs. So if you just touch it very lightly, it will turn the machine on. Now here's the quick and dirty way to test your optical drive to make sure that the lasers are working. We're going to remove this piece up here, the stabilizer piece. And underneath here, you can actually see the laser. Now, what I have here is a clear disc. Now, when you purchase a stack of CDRs or DVD-Rs, very often one of these clear discs will be included at the very top. A good idea to hang on to one of those because these can be really useful for troubleshooting purposes. You can see through the thing. So I'm going to put in this disc. Now when I put it in, I'm going to hold my finger over it here so it doesn't spin. I don't want it spinning without this top piece, to stabilize it. If it flies around there loosely, it might damage something. So as soon as I put it in, I'm going to hold my finger over it. There, now do you see them? I'm going to go ahead and eject it now. Now you should have seen very briefly a blue flash and a red flash, indicating that both lasers are in fact working. I'm going to do it one more time. We're going to do a little bit more of a close-up. Again, I'm going to do it again here. Put in the disc. Blue, red. So we know the laser is in fact putting out light. But that's why we had to remove the top lid so that we could do what we just did. Now that we've established that the lasers are putting out light, we're going to go ahead and remove the Blu-ray player again. The reason that there are two separate lasers, a red one and a blue one, the red laser reads CD and DVD discs, and the blue laser reads Blu-ray discs. The initial problem I had with this Blu-ray player was, although you could feed discs into it and it would accept them, it wouldn't read them. And it turned out that the drive motor wasn't spinning and the lasers were not illuminating. I had assumed that the lasers were bad and that was causing the motor not to spin. I replaced the laser and it didn't fix it. The problem was exactly the same. I was informed that, in fact, what was going on was if the motor is not working, then the laser will not illuminate. And the problem was probably originating from the control board. So a troubleshooting point then is the following, that if you put a disc in and the motor spins up, but the lasers do not illuminate, then the problem is most likely the laser itself. If the motor doesn't spin and the lasers don't illuminate, then think about the spin motor itself or the control board. I'm going to disassemble this a bit further. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove the bottom cover. Now, with the screws removed that we'd previously taken off, we can now take off this lid, exposing the bottom mechanisms. Now, at this point, what I'm going to do, we have this little arm here and it's got pegs on either end. I'm going to take little pieces of tape and I'm going to go ahead and fix those down. The reason I put the tape on these arms is you see there are little pegs here. These pegs travel in these little slots. There's one there and there's one here. Now on the other side of that slot, there's a piece of plastic with little tracks, little grooves in it. And these pegs have to stay in those grooves. If those pegs come out of those grooves, you're going to have a very difficult time getting things lined up again. This is the control card for the Blu-ray player. And this card, of course, drives all the mechanisms. One of the most annoying idiosyncrasies of the PS3 is that the Blu-ray player must be matched to the PS3 machine. There's some information on this card which has got to be matched up to some information in the PS3. In other words, you can't just go out and buy another Blu-ray player and slide it into your PS3 machine and expect it to work. It won't. If you do purchase another Blu-ray player, what you need to do is remove this card and transfer it to your new Blu-ray player in order for it to be matched up with your PlayStation 3. The term that people use is to say that the Blu-ray player and the PS3 are married, kind of like, I guess, a husband and wife. Now, in order to remove the card, here's a screw here and a screw here. Those come out. And then you've got 3 cables. This one, which is held in with a hinged cover, and then one here and one here, which are just pushed in and held in with friction. Now, there are 2 chips on this card, and the information to match up the Blu-ray player with the PS3 is stored on this chip. This chip is a controller chip which controls the motor and Blu-ray and so on. If you replace the Blu-ray player without transferring the card, or if you have a card which has gone bad and you need to replace the card, you then have to match up the new card with the PlayStation 3. This is a process called remarrying, and it's very complicated, very involved. It involves basically jailbreaking the machine and changing firmware levels and a lot of stuff. It's going to have to be in a different video. Now, when I first read about remarrying, I have to say I was rather intimidated by it, and I thought, well, gee, maybe I can modify this card. I believe that this chip had gone bad. This chip number is BD7969EFV, and you can purchase those chips. And so I did so, and I attempted to remove the original chip. Here's the original card. I attempted to remove this chip and replace it with a new chip. And it turns out that the chip is soldered in the center where you can't see it. And of course, I did not know this. With my soldering iron, I desoldered all of the pins. The chip still wouldn't come off, and then I realized, uh-oh, this thing is soldered in the center as well. You can't get that off with a regular soldering iron. I ended up literally chopping the chip off using a Dremel Moto tool, chopping it off piece by piece, finally getting it off, and then I soldered on this new chip. Well, it still doesn't work. I either damaged the board or I damaged the chip, or the problem lies somewhere else. So I decided to just go buy another board, and you can get these. Well, I think I paid about $10 for the board. Now, with the new board in place, the motor does spin and the laser does illuminate. So we did fix that problem with the new board. The problem is this board is not matched with my PlayStation 3, and it's not able to read the discs. So I'm going to have to go through that remarrying process, which will be on a different video. Now, if you do order just the card, make sure you got the right one. Here we have a part number BMD031, and also we have the 24-pin connector. Remember, there's a different version of this card that has a 60-pin connector, so make sure we've got these things right, okay? If you are going to attempt to replace just that chip, you have to have something more sophisticated than just a soldering iron. You cannot really remove that chip with a soldering iron. You have to have something like a hot air desoldering station. If you don't have something sophisticated like that, don't even attempt to remove this chip. But as long as we're here, we're going to talk about replacing lasers. I'm going to flip this thing over. Now we've got the cover to this thing. It's kind of clamshell together. You kind of see the seam right there. You can see where it's kind of held on. It's partially held on with a little latch. It's got one of these on each side. And in addition, there are screws, right? And there are 3 screws, one there, and there's one in here, and there's one down there. Okay, so now there are earlier versions of this which had 5 screws, 2, 2, and 1, and they did not have those little latches on the side. I'm going to go ahead and remove those screws. Now with the screws removed, I'm going to go ahead and lift these latches on either side. And now the top comes off. A very complicated mechanism. Here is the mechanism that automatically feeds the DVDs in. Now, in case you do need to replace your laser, and these lasers do go bad, you can see the laser right here, this device right here. You can purchase replacement lasers. I have one right here. Now, how do you get that thing out of there? Well, again, I've seen a number of different videos that show how to do this. Now, you can replace just a laser, or you can replace this entire platform. This is, of course, going to be cheaper just to replace this. And I've seen, people just taking this whole thing apart, but the easiest way is to simply remove this rail. You see, this thing travels on 2 rails, okay? One on either side. If you can remove the rail on this side and slide it out, then the whole thing just comes out in your hand. Okay, now the first thing to do is to disconnect this cable. And it's a little hinged latch mechanism. Get your thumbnail under it, just sort of bend it up. Now you can just sort of slide that cable right out. Okay, so now the laser is no longer electronically connected to the rest of the machine. Now we've got these 2 little bent pieces of metal here, and here you've got 4 of them, actually 2 on each side, sort of stabilizing those little rods. I'm going to remove the ones just on this side. Each one is held in by 1 screw each, here and here. I'm going to go ahead and remove those. Now when the screws are removed, I can just go ahead and take these out, these little metal tabs. The one on this side you have to be careful with because there's a cable right on top of it that you do not want to damage. Those 2 tabs are out of the way. Now kind of just sort of the brute force way of doing this, I hate to use that term, but you can see there's a little slot. There's a little slot in this piece of metal right here. Now the piece of metal is held in place by metal tabs on either side of it, sort of blocking it from moving. So you have to lift it enough to clear this metal tab right here. Okay, now I'm going to slide this forward all the way. That gives me a little bit more room. Now I'm going to take hold of this rod here. I'm going to try to lift it just enough to clear that little tab there, and we got it out, and we have it over the edge here. Now we can slide it this way. Okay, now with that rod out of the way, there's really nothing holding that laser in. So we're just going to go ahead and lift it up this way and slide it towards us. Now we have the laser out in our hand, okay? Now here we have the original and the replacement, and the number on that is KES-410A, okay? That's this laser with the two lenses. Now, earlier ones had this one, the KES 400, earlier versions of this machine. That was a single laser version. And these are not interchangeable, so make sure you get the right one. Now, the replacement laser probably will not come with this this white piece right here. Everything but. I'm going to flip this over, get a better look at that. This is what holds it in on that other rail. Now this piece is held in by only one screw, okay? This guy right here. You have to transfer this piece to the new one. Okay, so we are now ready to put our identical replacement laser back in. And as always, be very careful not to touch those little laser lenses, because, you know, a little smudge will make them malfunction. Okay, now we'll put our new laser back on. Now you want to match this channel here with this rail right here. Okay. Now we lower this laser into place to where these little grooves line up with the actuator motor there. Now we take our rod, we slide it back in. Let's move this guy all the way forward. It gives us the most room. Okay, so we feed the rod in this end through both of these holes here. Okay, now I got it just to go through that little metal hole right there. Slide it all the way forward, and now you just sort of pop it into this groove right here. There, now it's in place. You can see it moves normally. Good, so our new laser is in place. Now we reconnect the flat cable, lift up our little hinged, and you have to carefully slide this into the grooves. And with the cable all the way in and properly seated, go ahead and snap that shut. Okay, so that's the easy way to replace the laser. You know, some purists may not like the way I, muscled that rod out of there. I don't know. It seems to work. Now we have to put our little tabs back on here. These little, whatever you call them. Okay, that one's lined up. Maybe you can appreciate there's two holes here. There's three holes actually. The first two holes line up with two pegs, and the third one is for the screw. Okay, so that's also in place. Now we just put the screws back in. Okay, that's it. The laser has now been replaced. Now the tricky part is to get the top back on and get all these little slots and pegs and everything to line up. You can kind of see there's kind of a maze of slots and grooves here. You've got to get those pegs to line up just right. This thing just isn't going to work. Now, when you snap these together, this peg here is going to end up in this groove here, okay? That peg has got to be here. It's probably easiest to snap it from that side first. On this side, this peg here and this peg here have got to end up in this groove here. Now, the trick is the problem is particularly this peg right here, getting into that groove right there. And just before, you might have to take like a knife edge just before you snap it shut and just give this one a little bit of a nudge so it falls into this groove right here. We have these two plastic pieces, one on this side and one on this side. Okay, and they sort of move opposite to each other. When this one goes down, this one goes up, and when they do, it lifts the CD tray. Now, there are also grooves on the other side, and that's what these things go into. That's why I taped them down so that they didn't pop out. Then I had to struggle to get them back into the correct grooves. So you have to get pegs on both the front and the back of this thing into the correct grooves. Now, if you started on this side and get this one big peg lined up with that groove there. Okay. I've got that groove, I've got that peg lined up in the back. And you can see it there, it's lined up. Now as I bring this together, just before I snap it shut, that peg there is the problem one right there. I'm just going to give it just a little bit of a nudge. I think I got it, and we'll see. It's the trickiest thing about this thing is getting those darn pegs to line up. You know, if you get one of those pegs off, it'll absolutely drive you crazy. The thing just won't work at all. It won't accept discs. It'll, you know. So let's not forget to take our tape off of this end. Go ahead and put the bottom cover back on. I'm going to go ahead and put these two little black screws here in the front just to kind of hold things together. And we don't need to completely put everything together just to test it, but put our 24-pin cable back in very carefully. Again, I cannot emphasize how delicate these connectors are. Line up the black line and close the lid. Now we shall put on the optical drive again. Minus the top cover because we want to see what's going on. Now with everything pretty much put back together again, Blu-ray player and power supply in place, machine on, we're going to go ahead and do our quick and dirty laser test with our clear disc. Again, finger in place to hold it so it doesn't spin. Blue and red. Okay, they both work. So now we've confirmed we have a working laser. I just replaced a working laser with another working laser. The reason for this was simply to show you how to replace the laser quickly, efficiently, and how to test it both before and after. Okay. Now, in my own case, the laser initially did not work, so I thought it was the laser. I purchased another laser that didn't fix it, which led me to the control board. For completeness, we will show how to put the top cover back on again. Remember not to forget this piece. Now, if you placed any of the screws back in the front there in order to hold this cover on while you were testing, you'll need to remove them now. Now we take our drive and we place it into the top cover, the front part first. Okay, you have to clear those little tabs there. And once that's in, then you can slide it forward like that, and you can snap it back together. Now we will go ahead and put in the 3 front screws. And the 2 back screws. Remember, the front screws are black, the back screws are silver. Okay, top and bottom covers have now been put back on. In this video, we deal with several problems of the Blu-ray player in the PS3 machines. We showed how to remove the Blu-ray player, how to partially disassemble it and reassemble it, how to replace the laser, how to test the laser before and after replacement, how to perhaps narrow down where the problem is originating from, whether it's actually from the laser or from the control card, and why we might replace the control card or the entire Blu-ray player, and the problems related to remarrying in the event that we have to replace the Blu-ray player or the control card.